two countries can sort of focus on, or perhaps, private entities can focus on to take this bilateral relationship forward?
It was the Lyellpur Agricultural Institute at that time and the University of California, Davis, which were cooperating, but now that has expanded to many other avenues too, because Pakistan is largely an agricultural country. China is a great friend of Pakistan. China has always respected Pakistan's core areas of concerns. China has never violated our sovereignty or territorial integrity.
Hello and welcome to InferTalks, a podcast where I put you in the room with some of the biggest thought leaders from around the world. Today, to speak on the state of Pakistan and US relations and the myriad challenges that are likely to be confronted by Pakistan in the specter of great power competition, I have with me a special guest. My guest today is someone who served as former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan and has also had the privilege of serving as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States. These days, he's heading a think tank, Sanober Institute. My guest today is Ambassador Aizaz Chauhdry. Ambassador Aizaz, welcome to InferTalks.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Ambassador Aizaz, now as we start our conversation, let me come to the very first question, and this has to do with Pakistan-US relations. And the question has to do with the state of affairs between the two countries. We've been seeing the relations between the two countries going downhill since 2016 during the Trump presidency, and the trend has sort of continued even during, say, the period after the withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan, despite the fact that Pakistan happens to be one of the major export partners of the United States. Why do you think both countries have sort of failed to, bring about a major turn in their foreign relations? Is it because that Pakistan has sort of, centered its foreign policy towards geopolitics when it comes to, its relations with United States?
Well, global geopolitics has nearly always affected Pakistan's relations with US. I would say it was always the biggest determinant of the nature of the relationship between Pakistan and the US. Whether it was years ago, US fight against the communist world led by the then Soviet Union, or the Afghan jihad in Afghanistan against the Soviet forces, or the global war against terror. In all cases, it was the global geopolitics which brought Pakistan and the US closer to each other. And whenever the United States priorities, global priorities, changed, we drifted away from each other. So that has been a bitter reality. United States still remains, as you mentioned, the largest trading partner. We have a wholesome relationship with the US, but that notwithstanding, the government-to-government relationship between Pakistan and the US has always been oscillating between highs and lows. And the main reason is the priorities of the United States changing with the geopolitical developments around the world.
And so then what do you think can Pakistan really do to sort of make itself more relevant in the whole calculus of the US foreign policy as well?
Well, Pakistan's main stay, I would say, is its people-to-people relationship with the United States. You see, even when the government-to-government relationship has not been cordial, the people-to-people relationship has always prospered, and therefore Pakistan would always remain relevant to the United States. The only difference is that in the current scenario, and you mentioned the date of 2016, in the current scenario, the US priority is to contain the further rise of China. They don't like to use the word contain, they say pushback or counterbalance China. And for that, they have chosen India as the main counterweight for China. So Pakistan really does not fit into this new priority of the United States.
And if such is the case, Ambassador Azaz, and since you actually have sort of emphasized that people to people relationship is perhaps that pivot that can sort of, help Pakistan and US to take their relationship forward, what other areas then would you sort of emphasize that the two countries can sort of focus on, or perhaps, private entities can focus on to take this bilateral relationship forward?
Well, of course, trade is one, but US corporate America has also been investing in Pakistan regularly. Unfortunately, these days, Pakistan is suffering from economic downturn. Had our economy been in a more business-friendly mode, perhaps we would have again seen U.S. Investors coming to Pakistan. The second area that I see, which is of considerable importance for the young population of Pakistan, is information technology. Our experts like to stay connected to the Silicon Valley. In fact, they already are. And I think there is a great need for the government to facilitate that because still the United States is a leader of the technology world along with China. So I think that is another area. The third area is public health and education. United States universities are still a preferred destination for Pakistani students. And our physicians, there's a stream of physicians going to the US quite regularly. I know the field of agriculture too. In the days when Pakistan was just created and Pakistan US came closer to each other, considerable investments came into the agriculture domain, and we had our first green revolution at that time. I think it was the Lyallpur Agricultural Institute at that time and the University of California, Davis, which were cooperating. But now that has expanded to many other avenues too, because Pakistan is largely an agricultural country and there's considerable potential if American expertise is brought in. There could be several other areas also, but we can, I think these four areas will suffice for the moment.
Now, Ambassador Azaz, you've been a former diplomat. You're heading a new think tank in form of, Sanober Institute. Do you have any ideas, or would you like to go ahead and sort of initiate or undertake any initiatives which could sort of help expand, or perhaps give opportunity to private sector to look into possible opportunities? Because I think you've seen best of both the worlds. As a diplomat and now as a think tanker, what do you think you can sort of help bring on the table as well?
Well, I think the debate that is weighing heavy on the minds of policymakers of Pakistan is whether Pakistan will be able to maintain a balance in its relations with the United States and in its relations with China. The word balance is sometimes misleading, but the idea being that should Pakistan have the strategic autonomy to maintain cordial relations with both US and China, which are locked in an intensifying competition, in fact, bordering on rivalry. So that's the major challenge. And for that, it is important to have a frank debate within Pakistani thought circles. What choices does Pakistan have? There are people who argue that United States is not a dependable country, not a reliable friend, and therefore Pakistan should lean heavily towards China. I think this assessment is not correct. Yes, indeed, China is a great friend of Pakistan. China has always respected Pakistan's core areas of concerns. China has never violated our sovereignty or territorial integrity and it always refrained from interfering in our internal affairs. It has also supported Pakistan in international forums. And of late, it has been investing heavily in Pakistan through the China Pakistan Economic Corridor. All that is correct. But Pakistan has also had sustained periods of engagement with the US. And as I indicated, even during the times when the government to government relationship is not flourishing, even then the people to people relationship has always continued. So it is my sense that the main challenge for Pakistan is that how do we remain unaffected by the rivalry between these two countries? And the answer lies, in my humble opinion, is to maintain relations with both powers based on our own national interest, predicated on our own national interests. In fact, I would say own national economic interests. So that I think with uh, deft diplomacy, with some prudent steps, I think that is doable, and Pakistan should follow that course.
It's quite interesting that you're making a mention of the great power competition itself. Recently, I was actually watching this documentary on Netflix where this entire episode of Cuban Missile Crisis is sort of discussed in that, and it's quite interesting that it turns out to be one of the dangerous moments of the Cold War period itself. Some commentators have argued that perhaps United States and China do need a reputation or perhaps a similar crisis to bring them to the talking table in terms of understanding each other's red lines. Do you really think that has to be the case? Do you really think that both the US and China really need a serious crisis along these lines to help them bring on a talking table and understand each other's red lines as to how should they go about navigating this coming of a new great power competition between them?
We don't need another crisis, honestly. According to the CIPRI report, we already have 56 armed conflicts at the moment. And, there's a Ukraine Russia war going on, there is a war in Gaza, uh, and lot else is happening. So we don't really need a crisis of the sort of Cuban Missile Crisis, because the world is far more dangerous place now than it was then. Um, Second, the relationship between China and United States is quite different from the relationship that the Soviet Union had with the US. Soviet Union and United States had led to competing uh, camps of ideologies, of economic governance, and therefore they had divided the world into two mutually exclusive camps. That's not the case now. Now, the Chinese, for example, may be following their own communist model of governance, but their economic model is quite similar to what the US, the West, and the rest of the world is following. And we also see considerable interdependencies between the US and China. And even though the United States in the initial period thought that it might decouple its economy with China, it has lately had a rethink, and they now are talking about de-risking it. The leadership of China and United States have constantly and regularly maintained contacts, and even lately in San Francisco both met, and they've also had a telephone call. And the Secretary Blinken was in Beijing recently. So the two countries are living in an interdependent mode. They are also competing without engaging in a conflict. And United States may even have made some provocations in the South China Sea, has also formed what is called Indo-Pacific strategy, and also engaged in a coordination group called Quad with India, Australia, and Japan. But China is not in a mood to pick up any quarrel or conflict at the moment. The Chinese are more interested in continuing their peaceful rise. And therefore, they really don't need a conflict like Cuban Missile Crisis to realize each other's red lines. And I think they already are well aware of each other's red lines. So my sense is that they would not be entering into any conflict anytime soon. There is a there is an explicit statement, a joint statement from both sides, which stated that we would not want this competition to veer, and here I quote those words, to veer towards conflict. So it is very different, and I hope that the US and Europe at large recognize the merit of a globalized world in which interdependence and mutual, benefits will rule the day. And conflicts, especially between major powers, will not serve. I know that there is a literature in the US in the form of Thucydides' trap that when a prevailing power senses that there is another rising power, and this rising power could challenge the hegemony or preponderance of the prevailing power, then they both will end up in war. But it has not happened. I mean, this theory came up in 1916 in an Atlantic Council study, and then later on, Graham Allison even wrote a book, on this subject. But that hasn't really happened because I think the leadership of both countries will benefit if the world is not divided into camps. And from Pakistan's perspective, where I am sitting and coming from, I think we would also not like to see these countries, these two superpowers, move towards any conflictual situation, because that could, one, very dangerous, and second, it could be very difficult and pose difficult choices for countries like Pakistan.
And speaking of Thucydides trap and also analyzing China's foreign policy as well, you've been a diplomat for so many decades. Could you sort of like comment on what's the probability? And there's also a lot of concern that perhaps China could go about projecting its values on different countries and expect other countries to sort of behave the way in terms of its economic, political, and foreign policy as China does. What do you really think is a pragmatic or a realistic probability of that kind of thing happening in the very first place?
Years ago, when I was doing my master's in the Tufts University, and this was the summer of 1989, and you remember towards the fall, the Berlin Wall started falling, and we used to have considerable debates amongst the students and also in the classes as to what would happen to the future of the world. And then came the article called End of History by Francis Fukuyama. And this triggered a debate that perhaps the world has reached a stage where the liberal economy and liberal democracy have become the ultimate nirvana for the whole world to follow. That has not proven to be true. And we have seen that there are alternative models for development, and the growth and rise of China has shown that there are alternative models. So I think it is not fair for any power to impose its own values on the other power, because there are competing roads, competing models of governance which can deliver the same result. The result is being the prosperity and dignity of their citizens. So it is my view that the US and China can continue to compete, but not bring in the ideological content, because that could then take the world towards an ideological conflict, which at the moment it is not.
Now, Ambassador Aizaz, I think it's also important to sort of look at some of the most least appreciated challenges that can end up having a very high impact on countries, or on regions itself, or on the international order itself. When 2023 was about to start, I'm sure not many analysts had made this assessment that perhaps Israel and Palestine are going to go into some kind of an armed conflict, and then we see October 7th happens. It takes the world by surprise. I want to sort of take that kind of approach and sort of look at Pakistan. What do you think could be some of the least appreciated challenges that are likely to have extremely high impact in the next 10 years for Pakistan? And what is it that perhaps policymakers, young minds should really do to think about that and do something about it?
Yeah, it's difficult to predict the future, but things happen. You know, if you go back to the dawn of this century, 9/11 happened. Who would have predicted 9/11? Nobody. There were terrorist incidents even during the 1990s, here and there, but nobody could have predicted the scale of the terrorist attack that 9/11 represented. And the priorities of the world changed. Who could have predicted the phenomenal rise of China? In just 30 years, I mean, the country has become next to US, the second largest economy, the second largest military spender. Who could have predicted that NATO will continue to expand and reach the borders of Ukraine, forcing Russia to first occupy Crimea in 2014, and now this. So what keeps happening. Now tomorrow, who would know what South Asia would be like if India continues to move on the path that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is taking that country to? You see, when India started its path, its independent as an independent country, its journey in 1947, it was founded on the values of secularism and pluralism, somewhat also towards in autarkic socialist policies too. But look at India today. It has opened up its economy to the world, and it is moving at a breathtaking pace to making India a Hindu state. And should it make that, there'll be a serious concern for the minorities living there, particularly Muslims. And should there be a huge conflict, a communal conflict between Hindus and Muslims, you could see the exodus of Muslims from there. So anything can happen, and it would be so unfortunate that India would go through such a commotion. But that's the decision that this leadership has made. Now, Pakistan, sitting in this country, I cannot really make a comment that why India is becoming a Hindu nation. That's for them, for a decision that they must make, and they are making that decision. After all, Hindus are in majority in India, and therefore they have every right to make it a Hindu state. But the only thing that we are concerned are the fallout for the minorities there. And if that continues to surge ahead, then I'm afraid there could be what you call a high impact development, and which will drag the other powers are also in. Similarly, on Kashmir dispute, the Indians have continued to subjugate those people by force. It is also trying to establish a new normal with Pakistan by conducting terrorist surgical strikes. So anything of that can go wrong and will bring other powers in. So it is, I think it is for these reasons that the world should relook at the tendencies of unilateralism, of moving away from multilateralism, moving away from globalization, because the end would be a disaster for everybody. And therefore, Pakistan should continue to seek a world which is equitable, which is more connected, more focused on the values that brought the countries together after the Second World War. They saw the destruction and they formulated a world order. But now that world order is under severe stress. So who knows what may happen tomorrow? And that's something which is causing considerable anxiety, not only to people like me, but all across the world.
And now, Ambassador Azaz, let's speak about the issue of terrorism itself. We've seen multiple terror groups target the Chinese nationals in Pakistan. Have you seen the kind of seriousness that the international community should really be showing towards this very issue itself in the first place? And on the other hand, how serious, is the prospect or the probability that the same terror groups could also be targeting, members of other nations tomorrow as well?
Oh, indeed, sure. You see, uh, at the moment, Pakistan is suffering from terrorism, more so state-sponsored terrorism. I give you two examples. One, India keeps saying that Pakistan is committing cross-border terrorism, but fact of the matter is, for several years there has been no terrorist incident in India of any worth. But if Pakistan continues to suffer from terrorist incidents, so how can we, the victim of terrorism, be actually sponsoring terrorism inside India? It's just a mantra to strengthen or reinforce the policy of no contact that Modi government has adopted since 2016 vis-a-vis Pakistan. Uh, on the other hand, in fact, it is Pakistan which is suffering from India's state-sponsored terrorism by the fact that during 2013, 2023 alone, 20 persons were targeted by Indian operatives and killed. For two of them, Mohammad Riaz and Shahid Latif, Pakistan has provided, has announced that it has full information and evidence. But for others, they are still gathering evidence. Now, this is quite similar to what happened in Canada and what happened in the US. So, Pakistan is suffering from the state sponsored terrorism from India, which is so unfortunate for us because these two countries actually need to engage rather than commit, this kind of mutually hostile postures. Then we have the Western neighbor, Afghanistan. Again, there we thought that the Taliban government would adopt a more, friendly attitude towards Pakistan. But unfortunately, they have chosen to use TTP as their proxy to create instability, to create terrorism inside Pakistan. Now we have, I think our authorities have been talking to the Taliban a great deal of the damage that it can cause not only to the bilateral relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan, but also the relationship that Afghanistan wants to establish with the rest of the neighborhood. But unfortunately, so far, the Taliban government in Afghanistan seems to be behaving as an insurgent group rather than as a normal state. And for this reason, no country of the world, no country, including Pakistan, has offered it formal recognitions. 3 years down the line, 2.5 years down the line, they are still not recognized. Um, had the Taliban followed a different approach than using TTP as their proxy to shed Pakistani blood, things would have changed remarkably well because Pakistan and Afghanistan are neighbors bonded by ties of history and culture. And also, there are so many regional projects in the offing from Central Asia to South Asia, passing through Afghanistan. But it is, that is the geopolitical situation. But on that said, I would say that Pakistan, the government of Pakistan, and the people of Pakistan have to do more to curb the terrorist entities that are operating within the country. I think it is our responsibility at the end of the day to make our country safe. And if there are attempts from outside, well, you can blame outside till the cows come home. But you need to take action right here, and you need to make the people of Pakistan the main defenders against the non-state actors which come and create instability and terrorism inside Pakistan.
Speaking of any options of diplomacy, Ambassador Azaz, what do you really think can be done by Pakistan, or do you think there's a possibility that Pakistan and Afghan Taliban are likely to come to some sort of an agreement on how to deal with this issue of TTP being used by Taliban as a tool of coercion or as a as a means to sort of coerce Pakistan? Do you think there's some possibility where the two sides can come to some kind of an agreement and say that let's go past this deadlock and sort of fix this in a durable manner?
Of course, we can. I think first we must open multiple channels of communication with the Taliban, not just government to government. That is already there. Diplomatic channels is always there. But I think you need to reach out to the leadership sitting in Kandahar through multiple channels and convince them that Pakistan is their best bet. Pakistan is their best friend. And through Pakistan, they can really bring considerable prosperity to their own countries. Most of the trade that Afghanis have been doing is through Pakistan, and the transit trade is through Pakistani ports. That has been historically true. So I think there's a lot that needs to be communicated to the Taliban government in Kabul, that yes, you may have reached Kabul through the power of the gun, but that power of the gun should not be used against your neighbors. Otherwise, you would never be able to settle yourself for the ultimate objective, which is to the safety, dignity, and prosperity of the people of Afghanistan. The second action that we must take is to make the people of Pakistan the best defense. For example, the erstwhile FATA region, we should use the political forces there to become our shield against TTP. We should not depend wholly solely on kinetic actions, because kinetics can get you only so far. You need the people and their representatives in the ex-FATA region, as well as in the Balochistan region, to become your main defenders against terrorist forces like TTP or BLF or BLA and others. And so we should invest heavily on the people living in these parts of Pakistan, so that they don't sort of allow the TTP operatives to come inside. It is if the people of our country become the ultimate defenders against such non-state actors, then I think we'll be far more secure. No country can fight such wars without the full support of the people of the country. And that's why I believe that that's the second most important course that we must adopt. The third course that I think we should adopt is that we should try to make a pivot to geoeconomics. Because at the end of the day, geostrategy is what it is, geopolitics is what it is, but the bread and butter of Pakistan lies in the geoeconomics of the country, which means that availing of your geography to maximize the economic welfare of the people of Pakistan, and also forming linkages with the outside world in such a manner that the priority lies on the economic interactions and engagement with the rest of the world.
Ambassador Aizaz, on this note, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. It was a pleasure hosting you today.
Very kind. Thank you, my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation with Ambassador Aizaz. Our team works very hard to make this work possible, and it would mean the world to us if you could like and share our content. And if you'd like to stay informed about our upcoming podcast and other work, please hit the bell icon.